Good morning. I'm Don Boudreaux. I teach economics at George Mason, and I am a senior fellow at the Mercatus Center, as well as at Canada's Fraser Institute. The center's helping to sponsor this morning's excellent event. I'll say a few words of introduction, then I'll explain to you what the course of the morning will be, and then I'll introduce Senator Johnson. One of the greatest achievements of humankind is the modern entrepreneurial economy. This is an economy driven by what the economist Deirdre McCloskey calls market-tested innovation. Innovation, of course, is key. Market-tested innovation creates. Innovators in markets find ways to recombine resources, including human labor, to produce more and better outputs for mass consumption. Innovators not only make the pie grow, they make it more rich, more diverse, more tasty, and more nutritious. To be market-tested means that innovators can't steal or use the power of government to thwart their rivals. Entrepreneurs must persuade consumers to buy their products voluntarily and to pay the going market wages and prices for inputs. Only by passing this competitive market test without any privileges from government or any extra obstructions can a successful innovator truly claim to be a benefactor of humankind, a man or woman who increases what Adam Smith called the wealth of the nation, rather than reduce or merely redistribute that wealth. The general conditions necessary to ensure the maximum possible market-tested innovation are pretty clear. Along with respect for innovators and tolerance for economic change, economies, if they are to grow in ways that produce ever greater prosperity for ordinary men and women, require secure private property and freedom of contract. These, in turn, require that taxes be kept low and government intrusions into the economy minimal. In short, these require economic freedom. History testifies to this truth. It was only just yesterday, in the long stretch of human history, that ordinary people began what the Princeton economist Angus Deaton called the Great Escape from poverty. That escape began in earnest in Britain just 2 centuries ago. There, private property was secure, freedom of contract reigned, and government wasn't terribly intrusive, and entrepreneurs were respected. But the country, of course, that's led the world in market-tested innovation and in the process bestowed untold wealth on masses of people across the globe is the United States. From John Jacob Astor, through Rockefeller, Vanderbilt, Carnegie, and Ford, to Gates, Jobs, and Bezos, entrepreneur-driven, market-tested innovation has burst forth in this economy. The names that I've read, of course, are well known, and justifiably. But the real genius of the American economy is that it has created space for countless small, mostly unknown, innovative entrepreneurs to do their creative things. I've learned over the course of my research, that spans more than 30 years, that the market economy is a robust institution. It's more robust than I once thought it was, and thank goodness. It can take a lot of beating and still keep on working. But this fact doesn't mean that a market economy is indestructible. It can be destroyed. And it can be so harassed, burdened, bullied, and smothered that if it doesn't stop working altogether, its performance does indeed noticeably weaken. And there's evidence that it has noticeably weakened over the past decade or so. Is this evidence correct? What's happened to the U.S. economy over the past few years? This question is one of the ones that motivated this panel and the new collection of essays that's in this outstandingly good book that's brilliantly edited by me. These are all original essays written by some of the best minds in the business. So with along with my colleagues at the Fraser Institute and the Mercatus Center and George Mason, I want to recognize first Bobby Hertzberg with the Templeton Foundation. Bobby was instrumental in making this volume happen. We have on the panel some of the contributors, but we also have in the audience a contributor who is not on the panel. He just wants to show up and enjoy the food, but he's not going to speak. And that's Bob Lawson. Many of you know Bob because he's one of the great researchers in the connection between economic freedom and economic growth. The way this morning will go is I will introduce Senator Ron Johnson in just a moment. Then we'll have about a half hour or 40 minutes for a panel discussion and some Q&A, and then I'll introduce Representative Dave Bratt. There's no better person to launch this morning's event than Senator Johnson, who is a genuine entrepreneur, not a political entrepreneur. He didn't make his fortune on Capitol Hill distributing and pleading for rents. He made his fortune actually producing things that people want to buy. He is founder of a plastics company, Packer, in Wisconsin, which has become a major producer of specialty packaging for medical devices and employs 120 people. I'm told he's strongly influenced by Atlas Shrugged. That makes me an especially big fan. That book celebrates human creativity and the voluntary relationships between the voluntary capitalist acts among consenting adults, as Robert Nozick put it. Senator Johnson is, as far as I can tell, one of the few genuine champions of economic liberty and freedom working on this Hill. It's my pleasure to introduce Senator Ron Johnson.
Thanks, Don. Pop right in because time is short. I want to thank Mercatus and everybody for sponsoring this and everybody coming here. Let me start out with a little story because I'm an accountant by training. I'm a manufacturer. I'm a plastic salesman by vocation for 30-some years. And so I do get asked, so what made you decide to run for office? And let me quick tell the story because I think it sets up an awful lot of the points I want to make. It was October 2009, and we were in the midst of the healthcare debate and, of course, the rise of the Tea Party movement. And I was really involved on a volunteer basis in our education system in Oshkosh, Wisconsin, plus our chamber. And a member of the chamber was putting on a Tea Party in October 2009 and asked me to come to speak as a business person, talk about the harmful effect of government regulation on business. I said, well, I'd never given a speech in my life. I'd certainly not given a political speech. And so I'm happy to speak, but that's not what I want to talk about. They must have been desperate because she said, well, come and speak anyway. A few weeks before she asked, I'd heard President Obama talking about doctors trying to sell his health care plan, say that, well, doctors, they'll look at a fee schedule and they'll decide to amputate a foot or take out a set of tonsils for a few extra bucks. Not an exact quote, but pretty much a paraphrase exactly what he meant. Now, that is offensive on so many different levels, but in particular for my wife and I, it was offensive because our first child, our daughter Carrie, was born with a pretty serious congenital heart defect. Her aorta and pulmonary artery were reversed. So the first day of life, one of those greedy, money-grubbing doctors came in at 1:30 in the morning at Milwaukee Children's Hospital and did a procedure, saved her life. 8 months later, when her heart's the size of a small plum, in 7 hours of open heart surgery, a team of incredibly dedicated, incredibly skilled medical professionals rebaffled the upper chamber of her heart. So her heart operates backwards today. She just turned 32 a couple weeks ago. She's actually in Baltimore. She's a nurse practitioner. She's in a degree program at Johns Hopkins University now. Now, I gave that speech. I told that story. Yeah, afterwards, people came up to me, people I didn't know for a number of months on the streets of Oshkosh and say, hey, liked your speech, Ron. Why don't you run for office? And my answer was always pretty consistent because I'm not crazy. But then they passed a healthcare law. And as Don was saying, I do sell into the medical device industry. I've got a fair amount of knowledge of the free market system. And I knew exactly what the end result of Obamacare would be. I started describing it immediately as the greatest single assault on our freedoms in my lifetime. And I think that's true, and I think we're witnessing that today. So, bottom line is, combined with the passage of Obamacare, combined with these enormous debt and deficits, I decided to run for office, and yikes, now I'm here. And I see this function. Another quick story. I was at a business roundtable event, this was probably a couple years ago now, and the head of business roundtable stood up, welcomed the crowd, and said, listen, we're the business roundtable. We represent the largest corporations in America, who, let's face it, I know we're not in real good standing with the American public, but that's a conversation for another day. That's what he said. I was the first senator to stand up after that, and I went right to that comment. I said, we can't afford to have that be a conversation for another day. And then I asked a rhetorical question. How do we get to a point in this nation where rather than celebrating and incentivizing success, we demonize and demagogue against it, and it works politically? I mean, I know I've witnessed it. I lived through the 60s, the unrest, as liberals who aren't exactly real promoters of a free market system took over our university system. And so now that they've controlled lockstep, and by the way, if you've never, you may have gone to college, but if you've never really dealt with the university system through the administration, you really don't know how completely controlled our college and universities are by the left. But when you control the College of Education, of journalism, of law, of economics, there are a few good ones, okay, but a lot of them are Keynesians, you control our culture. And the left has had a lock on our culture for 50 years, and it shows. So the point being, if we're going to get our economy moving forward, if we're going to be able to create the good-paying jobs that everybody in this town purports to want, we need to realize what makes this country great. Here's a hint. It's not big government. It's not decades of layer upon layer upon layer upon layer, I could keep going on, of rules and regulation laws. By the way, we don't pass laws anymore. We pass frameworks for the fourth branch of government to create the law. Two examples, Obamacare, Dodd-Frank. I think Obamacare was 380,000 words. I think Dodd-Frank was 350,000 words as written. This is about a year ago, and I checked in on Dodd-Frank, the progress. We'll call it progress. At that point, Dodd-Frank was up to 15 million words of regulations. Obamacare was up to about 12 million words. You start to understand the problem. But it's really an attitudinal problem. It's a cultural problem. You know, I come from the business world. You know, it's not easy to think of a product or service that somebody else wants to buy. But that's not very easy. You know, if you ever start up a lemonade stand as a kid, it's kind of hard to sell that lemonade, unless it's a really hot day on a really busy street. It's even more difficult to produce that product at a cost that is less than you can sell it for. That's a really hard thing, and yet the attitude here in Washington, D.C., because they look at the folks that Don was talking about, these incredibly successful entrepreneurs of Silicon Valley and these billionaires after, you know, at a very young age. Well, business is easy. No, it's extremely hard, which is why I don't have the exact stats on this. But my sense is most businesses fail. The successful ones have done something really extraordinary. And yet the political culture is out to demonize them, to milk them for everything they possibly have to fund this massive government that is doing so much harm to our individual liberty and to our economy. One of the things coming from a business background I'm pretty familiar with is strategic planning process. It's pretty foreign around here. If you'll notice, in Washington, D.C., everything's pretty much at a tactical level. I mean, we introduce, I don't know, 10,000 different bills. I mean, none of them, very few of them have a chance to pass, but it's all about messaging to get reelected. It's all tactical. Now, in a strategic planning process, that's the last step, the tactic. In a real strategic planning process, you start with reality. You have to ascertain it. You have to understand what is the reality situation. Now, in business, you do a SWOT analysis. Very foreign term around here. When I say SWOT around Washington, D.C., everybody looks for a fly. It's strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. So I'm going to go through a quick SWOT analysis of the American economy. But you start with the reality. Then, based on reality, you set yourself achievable goals. You spend a lot of time doing that, because if you spend a lot of time doing that, it's really pretty easy to come up with strategies to achieve those goals. And then, of course, tactics are just there to support the strategies. So if you're at the tactical level, tactics that aren't really tied to a strategy, that aren't directed toward an achievable goal, that are divorced from reality, did I just describe Washington, D.C.? I think I did. So let's quick do a SWOT analysis on the American economy. It's pretty simple. And when you do the SWOT analysis, it really directs what we need to do from a public policy standpoint here. We have two major strengths, well, three, and we have this marvelous form of self-governance. We by the way, we have the most wondrous vision statement of self-governance ever created. And I'm into mission, vision statements, direct activities. It's included in our Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they're endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights. Among those are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Now, that is powerful. That's directive. That's a vision statement that's going to have staying power, if we believe it, if we remember it. So again, we got that vision statement. Economically, we are the world's largest market. We're the world's biggest customer. You know, I come from the manufacturing background. Manufacturers want to be close to their customers. It makes just all kinds of sense for logistics, for customer service. That is an enormous competitive advantage in a global economy. We're the world's biggest customer. Our other big advantage is we got a Bountiful now because of innovation, because of hydraulic fracturing and horizontal drilling, because of some innovative minds of people that aspired. Now we have abundant and plentiful and relatively cheap energy. Again, an enormous economic advantage. Yet, we have public policy that's trying to artificially drive that cost of power up. That is crazy. If you want to manufacture something, you need power. Cheap power is better than expensive power. Let's keep it cheap. By the way, if we keep it cheap, if we have a robust economy, we can afford the pollution controls to keep our environment clean, okay? Where you are economically unprosperous, you can't afford it, and so you got a dirty economy, okay? What are our weaknesses? We have a few, and they're significant. An awful legal environment. I was talking to Don earlier. Charles Murray's got a great little riff in terms of, when you have so many laws, so many layers, laws that are enforced at the discretion of prosecutors, you're really in a lawless society, and I think we're at that point. You need a legal framework that provides certainty. Things like a uniform commercial code is a fabulous idea, but we've gone way beyond that. So we've got an awful legal framework. We have a completely uncompetitive tax system. Put yourself in the position of a global manufacturer that wants to come here and manufacture for this world's largest market. Are you going to site your plant in Toronto with a 15% tax rate or Detroit at 35%? Trust me, people that have a lot of money to invest, they can do that math. And it's right now, it's not in America's favor. And then, of course, the regulatory environment is onerous. Let me spend just a little bit of time making the macro case on how onerous our regulatory environment is. There are a number of studies, and I know they're disputed, but they give you some sense of how onerous our regulatory burden is. The cost of federal regulation is close to $2 trillion. Now, again, we are getting immune to these massive numbers, hundreds of billions, trillions of dollars. I did see a bumper sticker one time, please, God, don't tell Obama what comes after trillion, which is a little too close to the truth. Okay, $2 trillion. Let me put that in perspective. Only 9 economies in the world today are larger than $2 trillion. Think about that. We're placing a regulatory burden on the people that are going to aspire. They're going to innovate, they're going to grow businesses and create jobs larger than all but 9 economies in the world. And here's another one I've been kind of using. Remember 2009, back there, the old trying to pass Obamacare. There was so much outrage on the left that we were spending a sixth, imagine it's a sixth of our economy healing ourselves, trying to stay well, curing diseases. What a terrible thing to spend money on. By the way, if you're going to juice a sector of your economy to create jobs, I can't think of a better sector than healthcare if that money's being spent in freedom by individual consumers. Because in the healthcare sector, you've got jobs available at the lowest skill level to the absolute highest, okay? Again, outrage, spending a sixth of our economy on healthcare. Well, that was about $2.5 trillion. Our regulatory burden's $2 trillion. Where's the outrage? Where's the political pressure to get some control over a $2 trillion regulatory burden that matches the desire to take away our freedom by taking over our healthcare system? I'd really like to know that. I'll leave you with one final thought, because I see it multiple times a day. The Stockholm Syndrome. You know what that is, right? That's when a kidnap victim starts thinking kind thoughts of their kidnapper when they show them some level of mercy. You'll give them a glass of water so they can survive another day. Well, I see that all the time as business interests come in. Quite honestly, University of Wisconsin-Madison came in asking for regulatory relief. I said, welcome to the party, happy to get you that glass of water. But they'll come in and say, listen, Senator, please, please, would you co-sponsor this bill? It's taken us 6 months or 6 years to get the permit for this building project, and if you sign this bill, if you co-sponsor it, we can knock that down to 5 years and 9 months. We will be so grateful. So, that's appropriate. People have to do that. You've got to be able to survive that extra day. But what I'm asking people and what I'm asking you to do is think a little bit bigger than that. I literally, over the last couple of days, I've had people come into my office looking for regulatory relief. And you know what their solution was? They were asking me to increase the budget of the regulator. So they had more regulators to do the permitting quicker. I said, do you understand what you're asking for, really? You're asking for me to hire more kidnappers, which means you will never, ever be set free. And that's my message. We as Americans have got to demand our freedom back. God bless you.
Thank you so much.